How are you? Would you have some here?
I would definitely.
Can you just give us a number? Just raise your hand. Stuart, thanks. Nice. I'll take a look. I appreciate it. Sorry? Good morning, everybody. Wow. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you. First of all, I think everyone has got a copy of this. The Social Action Committee wanted me to pass them out and take a look at it. It's very wonderful that our congregation is involved in things like this. Let me thank people who contributed to today. Bagels sponsored by Patty London. Streaming sponsored by Nancy and Russell Ben-Giat in honor of your anniversary. How nice. What's the date? 35 years. Wow. And what's the day of the anniversary?
I said November 8th.
November 8th. Many more. Yeah. And pick up by Bob and Sue Curtis. I saw them a minute ago. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks to everybody for your participation. I got a note from Jordan Tobin about, he always tells me when things are good here in terms of the sound and the camera on. So we don't know if the camera's on, we just go right ahead with it. But they're experimenting a bit with getting the camera on at 9 o'clock, just to be sure they can check it and have it ready in time. And they wanted to do the sound as well. But I said to them, people come in and there are conversations, and I don't know that we want these conversations to be picked up. So I said to Jordan and to Jen, let's not turn the sound on until 9:15. And that's why I'm just checking now, and he says the sound is on. So this is good. Okay, so blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so today we are working on Abraham. So the Torah portion, we're trying to follow the Torah portion, and it's a big challenge at the beginning of the year because there's so many chapters and so much material in each Torah portion that inevitably we get a little bit behind, but we're going to try to stay up with it so that we feel we're on the Torah portion of the week. There are 3 Torah portions in about Abraham. Lech Lecha, which is Genesis 12 through 17. Vayera, which is this week, which means and God appeared, and he appeared, chapters 18 through 22. And then there's Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah. Paradoxically, the chapter 23 is about her death, but we might also infer that even though she dies, she gave life, and the life that she gave goes on. And that portion is chapter 23, 24, and half of 25. In the middle of 25, we begin the story of Isaac and Esau, Jacob and Esau. So now we're in the middle of the Abraham. I'm pausing because there was something else I wanted to say, but I can't remember it. But it'll come to me. So we're now looking at Abraham, and I'd like to have a particular focus this morning. Not that we can't think about other things, and that is. We've spent some time on the first 11 chapters of Genesis, the so-called primeval, primary history, universal history, humankind, and we looked at these chapters in terms of not only the positive aspects of the situation, Noah is righteous, original blessing, a variety of things like that, but also the problems that these chapters present to us. So my hypothesis is that with the call of Abraham, we begin to get some understanding of the solutions to those problems. In other words, God's call to Abraham, according to the Bible, or at least according to my hypothesis, is not that Abraham is called out of the blue, but Abraham is called in the context of mostly failure. We might say the failure that is representative of the human condition, both in terms of nature, who provides problems, challenges for us, but also human nature, which itself is wayward without X. What is X? What is it that the Torah offers as a kind of antidote to the problems raised by chapters 1 through 11? This is not the only way to look at Abraham, but I'd like us to try to focus on that as we read through excerpts of these chapters. Okay, so we remember perhaps that at the end of chapter 11, the last chapter of the universal history, that Abraham and his family, I'm now in chapter 11, verse 31, Terach took his son Avram and grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son. They set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. A journey is undertaken. We don't know why they undertook this journey, what are the circumstances which led them to move, but at least they're on the way. And they're on the way to Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. So we might say that the journey is interrupted, or ended even, by not going as far as Canaan, but only going part way. We don't know why either. Verse 32. The days of Terach came to 205 years, and Terach died in Haran. Chapter 12. The Lord said to Abraham, go forth. Okay? So here's my suggestion, that what the author is implying is that a journey is undertaken by Abraham and his family for certain reasons unknown to the reader. And that journey does not arrive at its conclusion, but in the midst of that process, God comes and calls Abraham to complete the journey. Okay? So a journey that begins by factors which we might call natural, economic, geographical, maybe there's war, there's famine, we just don't know, turns out to be a journey inspired by God's call. In other words, the journey which is undertaken under a certain set of circumstances becomes another kind of journey. Some of you may have seen last night our service in which I gave the Devar Torah, and the basic point that I was trying to make was to use this modern notion featured by Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, that he called seeing as. Seeing something as something else without it ceasing to be what it appears to be. And the examples that I used were the rainbow. So there's a rainbow at the end of the Noah story, but it's reinterpreted as a sign. a sign of the covenant. And whenever you see the rainbow, you will know that God is invested still in the covenant with humanity. Okay? So the rainbow does not cease to be the rainbow, but it is also, the Torah is suggesting, to be seen as something in addition. Okay? So at the end of the story of the Exodus from Egypt, chapter 14, in chapter 15, the Song of Moses, Micha Mocha Be'elim Adonai, who is like you, our Lord, the people sing in celebration. So the narrative ends at the end of chapter 14. Let's take a look at it. Chapter 14 of Exodus. And at the end of chapter 14, verse 30, the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians. Israel saw, and I want to focus on the word to see here, Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore, and when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord, they had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Two kinds of seeing. I might call it empirical seeing, seeing through our senses, and a deeper kind of seeing, which we could call insight. After all, we can open our eyes and see the Egyptians dead on the seashore if we were there. But we can't open our eyes and see the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians. That we can't see empirically. What we can do is ask ourselves, is there a deeper meaning? Is there a significance to this event? Let's suppose the next day the Egyptian Times had on the front cover, myriad of Egyptians dead on the seashore. And then there's a story about the event. Would the front page also feature, this was a wondrous event, initiated by God in order to display something. That doesn't belong on the front page because that isn't the news. It belongs in the editorial on the op-ed page. David Brooksman has an op-ed piece on what does this mean? So that this, it seems to me, is another example of seeing as, to see an ordinary event which nobody can doubt, so to speak, as, in addition, something else. So I think the Abraham story starts in this way. Journeys undertaken for one reason often turn out to be for another reason. We see in our journeys something that we may not have anticipated or seen at the beginning of it. Okay? So it strikes me that the author right away here is pointing out the limitations of what our senses present to us. And that another kind of seeing, let's call it insight, is both necessary and possible. Necessary because the empirical description is not enough. Possible because this is the worldview of the biblical author. Things are often other than they appear to our eyes. Don't follow the dictates of your eyes, but look more deeply into the situation. And we have that right away. So let's now look at the beginning of chapter 12 and just ask ourselves what is happening to Abraham. And the Lord said to Avram, it's clear to those who have read this before, that his name is not yet Avraham, it's Avram, just like Sarah is not Sarah yet, she's Sarai. The letter He is added to both of their names, Avraham, He. The Lord said to Avram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and curse him that curses you. And all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you." Okay? So let's talk about two things. What are the features of these first three verses? And in what sense might they be seen as a kind of answer, a response, an antidote to the problems generated by the first 11 chapters? So what do we see here? God is talking to Abraham. Very good. Does God talk to anybody in the first 11 chapters? Yes. Adam and Eve. Anybody else? He comes down to rebuke those who built the Tower of Babel. You know, I don't know. I haven't thought of that question until right now. So I'm not sure what the answer is. Gary?
Doesn't he speak to Cain?
Who? Cain, very good, speaks to Cain. So yes, God does speak to others in those first 11 chapters. To Abraham, he speaks of promise. Does he speak of promise or positively to those in the first 11 chapters? You may eat from any tree in the garden, that's positive. But that's negative. I'm not suggesting that the negative overwhelms the positive. There is some positive utterance. Any other thoughts about that, Jim?
Well, it's a subtle commandment in the form of an enticement.
Namely?
Well, he's telling you all these things will happen as a result of doing this, so it's a very subtle commandment.
Okay, very good. So there is not only a direction given, you shall do this, but it seems stronger to you than that. And by the way, let's see, verse 4, right after, obviously, verse 3, right after those words by God, Abraham went forth, Vayelech Avram, as the Lord had commanded him. So, Jim's suggestion is there is a kind of commandment you must do and response. So Abraham is now responding positively, and we might say quickly, right away. In terms of the flow of the verses right away. How do I know that there aren't 4 years between verse 3 and verse 4? That's overstated. There might be some time, but as the narrative flows, Abraham is ready to respond positively. Okay? Do we have positive responses in the first 11 chapters? We have Noah as a righteous person, but we don't have his righteousness as a response to a command. In other words, we don't know that Noah is listening to God, or even that God is addressing Noah. For all we know, Noah may be a Kantian. He understands that motivation is what counts in assessing the moral worth of an action. And Noah is a person with positive motivation, but it may be out of his own understanding and not in response to God. I don't want to be unfair to Noah. But at least it's not explicitly said that God commanded anybody in that first chapter. So I'm just wondering here, I'm thinking out loud about these things actually. whether God is as invested, as involved in the well-being of the communities of the first 11 chapters. God comes in to rebuke. God enters in to punish. Every now and then he speaks. Every now and then he speaks positively. But in some sense, maybe you'll think this is overstated, human beings in the first 11 chapters are on their own. And being on their own, they rely on their own personal resources in order to act in a certain way. And given that they're relying only on their resources, we discover that those resources, mind, heart, will, observation, are inadequate to accomplish the task of being good. So it's possible that there's a distinction already at work between the Abraham story and what we read in chapters 1 through 11. Here, God, in Abraham's story, God is very present. God is telling Abraham to do certain things. As Jim wants to suggest, maybe it's even stronger than that God is subtly commanding Abraham to do certain things. And Abraham hears God and responds. Okay? So it may be that with the arrival of Abraham, we find that the inadequacy of human beings on their own is about to be dealt with by a God who is involved and is willing, perhaps feels the necessity of guiding human beings. Candy?
So why did God pick Abraham? Was it because of the qualities that he already possessed? Or was it because the qualities he had to change? So that God could change him?
I think that's an excellent question, actually. Let's contrast it with Moses. Moses isn't called by God until chapter 3. Is it chapter 3? At least not until we see some things about Moses that Moses is willing to interfere in an altercation between an Israelite and an Egyptian. Namely, he is shown to be a kind of partisan to his people, which is immediately followed by another fight between two Israelites, in which the principle of partisanship is no longer adequate. That second fight is testing the adequacy of partisanship. In Plato's Republic in chapter 1, when there a variety of views about what is justice, and there is a guy whose name is Polemarchus who says that justice is helping your friends and harming your enemies. Not bad. Not bad. My family's picture album is precious to me, and I indulge yours. Well, Socrates shows it to be inadequate, as does the Torah, because Polemarchus' view is the principle at work in that first story. He helps the Israelite against the Egyptian. But the Torah immediately challenges its adequacy. It doesn't say it's not valid, it's not adequate. When it presents a test case, two Israelites fighting. And then the Torah says that Moses favored the one who was just. So immediately, before Moses is called, we see his commitment to two principles: helping his own people and caring for justice. And the two are often in conflict. If his people acts negatively, problematically, then the principle of justice must be applied. So with this is kind of a long way to respond to your point. Why was Moses chosen by God? We know, because we read stories about Moses' characteristics before God calls him. God calls him because God says to himself, look at this Moses guy. He really feels strongly about two important ideas. This may be my guy. I mean, we find something else that Moses does. When he wanders toward the Midianites and he sees marauders assaulting women. So he's also a kind of savior. A person can save a situation, save people in a dangerous situation. If God is looking at the CVs of certain candidates to be called, Moses' CV stands out. True? We don't have that with Abraham. So Candy raises a very good question. One possible answer to this question, as you suggest, is that we come to see who Abraham is, which vindicates God's choice. So, why the call is a mystery, and the mystery is softened when we see how and who Abraham is. How he acts and who he is. Does that seem like a possible answer to your question? I think the Torah also, see, this is also one of the elements of this idea of seeing as, because the world is more mysterious to us, has more meaning than we might originally feel. We can walk through our days and think we understand the way things are. But often there's a mysterious core at the bottom. There's more meaning than is apparent. And maybe the call of Abraham is intended to, I don't like the word intended. Maybe we can discover in the call of Abraham that kind of idea. That there is mystery at the core of fundamental events in our lives, or even in all events. And we're called upon to be more observant, to be more vigilant, to think more about the deeper meaning of the events that we engage in. Jim?
But if we go forward a little bit, I don't know if it was Jacob or Samuel, as to Candy's question, how did he pick Abraham?
Yes.
I forget which one it was when God said, "For I formed you in the womb. I knew what you were going to be."
Yeah. That's Jeremiah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it would seem that most everything is preordained.
Well, you're leaping to a big conclusion here.
Well, yeah, but that's what was stated. So he knew the personality because it was formed prior to birth.
Yeah, no, of course you've opened up a big question of determinism and free will. And look, they're both a part of our lives. Certain things are determined by us. Jeremiah, who tries to get out of the call, calls somebody else, and God says, no, I knew you in the womb. So Jeremiah was predetermined, and it just pushes Candy's question back 9 months, we might say. Why was Jeremiah called? But on the other hand, people act with free will all the time. We know this is the case when we feel what we feel when we read fiction, let's say. We feel the reality of the character. We feel some connection to the character because we think of ourselves of having free will. Not totally. You know what? I'm going to put this pad on the table next to me. How did it get there? I chose to do it. Anybody doubt that? Was it determined that I should do that? So when we see a character in a story, and we sense that this character is like us, having choices which matter, nobody can convince us that we don't have free will. Is free will, do our choices 100% totally make what we do in our lives? No. Certain things happen to us. So there is a combination of both. But just because Jeremiah was chosen by God for no apparent reason, like Abraham, doesn't mean, and so on and so on. Both of them vindicate the choice, but it seems to me important not to just rest with that idea. That it turns out that God was right to choose Abraham because Abraham was this kind of person who did all these amazing things. Because that ignores the mystery at the core of life as well. Abraham Joshua Heschel says, behind the mystery of our lives is meaning, and behind the meaning of our lives is mystery. Don't you love that? I mean, there's meaning which we can discern, understand, and act upon, but also there's a limit to how much meaning we ourselves can discern. There's always more than we can understand. And that strikes me as both an element of religion and of poetry, of fiction, of literature, because the great characters are also mysterious to us. We can't get to the bottom of who they are. Those of us who are involved in poetry know that for all the progress we make on a given poem about what it means, we're always left with both differences of opinion, which we can't wrestle to the ground and get unanimity, and there's something in the poem that is beyond our ability to comprehend it. There's mystery in poetry. Maybe it's the mystery of language, I love this quote by W.H. Auden. I just said it somewhere. I can't remember where. Auden said he loves to hang around poems and overhear the words whisper to one another. Wow. Can a reader of the poem get to the whispering? The connection among the words, the resonances, the rhythms. So the notion of mystery is an important reality in our lives. And it seems to me right away, the Torah gives us the possibility of recognizing that. Notice I didn't say the author intends it. What do we know about what the author intended? And do we care? I mean, who's the author? Is the author the authority, or is the mystery of what the author creates even beyond the fathoming of the author? Vivian.
But it seems to me that once an author creates a character, he also sets that character free to the interpretation, to the recipient, to the reader, to the listener.
Oh, okay, to all that.
I mean, that goes with poetry. I mean, this is story, this is fable. So and the fact that we back off and say, well, who is this, or why did he do this, is part of the story.
There you go. I love that. I love that. I recall something that Tolstoy said about Anna Karenina. While he was writing the novel, somebody asked him, what's she going to do next? And his answer was, I don't know. She'll tell me.
That's creation.
Yeah.
Whether it's human, divine, inspired, we're beyond, I don't know.
Yeah.
Go figure that space between.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's part of what I think that the great authors also have in mind. Maya?
Just an answer to Cindy. I think that others were wrestling with the same problem. Why was he chosen? And then comes those legends of Terach and the gods and all that stuff. So that was the explanation.
That's great. What Maya is saying is that the Midrash faces this question, why was Abraham called, and answers it by creating a prehistory of Abraham. You know, the business about the idols in his father's idol shop, until Abraham shows God that he's not subject to idolatry, that he's open to, if not having arrived at it by himself, the notion of one God. And as God is sitting up there and watching Abraham in action before God calls him, God says, wait a minute, this is my guy. So that notice the Midrash, let me dare to say it like this, and then we'll think whether that's obvious. The Midrash has a problem living in the presence of an unsolvable mystery. It's got to get an answer to it. This is what Maimonides does too. Maimonides says that God didn't choose Abraham, Abraham chose God. Through philosophical rumination, right? What causes X? Well, Y causes X. What causes Y? Z. What causes Z? A. What causes A? B. Can this go on forever? No. We have to come to one ultimate basic cause, God. I mean, David Hume, if you've ever read his dialogues, destroys some of these arguments for the existence of God. Even if God, Hume wants to say, is a valid conclusion, what God would it be? Does it have to be the God of Scripture? We assume that if a proof arrives at God, then it's the God we believe in, or the God of the tradition. But it can be some other God. It can be many gods, and so on. So these proofs run aground. And it's another argument for mystery. Not that everything has to be a mystery. So Maya makes a good point here. Under the pressure of the mystery of the call of Abraham, the Midrash makes up a story. And it's a good story. I mean, it's not only a good story in itself, it shows us something about Abraham, something more. That Abraham was a monotheist. We discussed a couple of years ago the difference between monotheism and monolatry. Monolatry is the worship of your only God. That doesn't mean that this God is the only God in the universe. It's just that this happens to be the one. So you're mono, you're one, but it's alatry. It's not the God of the universe. Monotheism, which is the claim that there is only one God, period, comes in chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, where the author says there is a God and there is none else, v'ein od. There's monotheism. Whether Abraham is a monotheist or a monolatrist is not clarified. It doesn't matter, does it? Malcolm? Notice we've only got to verse 3 here.
Strikes me that Noah has gotten short shrift. If he had a better agent,
Yeah.
it could be cast as every bit as or more important than Abraham or Moses. He's answered God's call and has
To build the ark.
saved humanity.
Yeah.
Save the world.
Let's hear it for Noah. Yeah. You know what the rabbis tried to do is to show that even the text itself thinks that Noah is to be subordinated to Abraham. And here's one of the ways they do it. The story of Noah opens up by saying, and Noah walked with God. Whereas with Abraham, I think it's in chapter 17, God says to Abraham, walk before me. so that Noah needs someone to hold his hand, whereas Abraham can take initiative on his own, even over and against God. Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm not asking for a vote, how powerful is what the rabbis have done? I mean, I think Malcolm would say, and I think many of us would agree in some way or another, that this is special pleading. That Noah, really, in an era of wickedness, stands out. Maybe Abraham gets an A for piety, and Noah gets a B minus. Let's suppose that. But to get a B minus in a class where everybody gets a D minus, it's pretty darn good. Maybe even better than a person that gets an A in an advanced placement class. So, being fair to Noah, I think you call us to that need or possibility. Yeah. But don't you think that the authors or the editors of these original chapters are trying to set up the problem? And so they really can't have Noah be a totally exemplary figure, because if so, natural human being, let's make a distinction between natural humanity and called humanity. Abraham and Abraham's kin are called. Noah is natural. He's not called. I mean, he may come to be called, but we don't know why he was good. We know why he responds to God. The Torah's whole program depends upon, doesn't it, the inadequacy of human beings on their own. The risk of basing our values on what our senses provide for us. Shema Yisrael, not Ra'eh Israel, not see, O Israel, hear, O Israel, words, and not what our eyes present to us. And that distinction, which is so crucial to the authors of the Torah, falls to the ground if there is an overwhelming success by natural human beings. You see the point? I mean, this doesn't mean that the Torah believes that those who are not called are worthless. The Torah remains universalistic, in a certain sense, humanistic, cares about human life and human community. Through you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. The goal is always all the nations of the earth, and not just this particular one. This particular one is always called as an instrument, not to be gloating over that we're special in a way that no other nation can rise to. So the author of the first 11 chapters has a problem. How do I show the inadequacy of human beings on their own while not denigrating the value of humanity? And Abraham is called to do both. Called, the value of being called, but called as an agent to redeem, however that's understood, general humanity. Jackie.
Why, in chapter 7, verse 5, and you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. Why the name change? Was it suddenly because there was, he had another role to be the father of a nation? And why all of a sudden? Would that be the answer?
My first response is, I don't know.
Okay.
But this is the chapter 17 in which Abraham is called to the circumcision covenant. Now, the letter He is often an abbreviation. I don't think in the Bible, no, I know it's not in the Bible. Hey is an abbreviation for God. So, I mean, when we write God, we don't write Adonai, we write Adoshem, we put a dash in there, or we just say hey with an apostrophe. So it's possible, though I don't think it's necessitated, that hey indicates a new relationship with God. That's a very nice thought. Is it true? I don't know. But in any event, and Sarah too. Sarah is the Yud, Sarai, Yud at the end to Sarah. So I'm wondering whether to go here. Yeah, I don't think I will. Okay, so, all right, so God calls Abraham and says to him, I will make you a great nation, I will bless you, and I will make your name great. Now, we've already seen the issue of a great name before, right? Remember? Tower of Babel. They built a tower in order to make themselves a name. So here, in the next chapter, chapter 11, the Babylonites, chapter 12, Abraham. No, I'm going to make you a great name. Your name is attached, the greatness of your name is your attachment to me, God. Not that you yourself, out of your own limited human nature, are capable of making yourself a great name. Or let's put it this way, a name that doesn't run aground because of hubris. If you think you're making your own name, all that you value, that you can be in terms of value, is your own doing, then you're going to be by definition limited. You can be the most human you can be if you attach yourself to me. Now, I'm not saying that as a claim outside this discussion, but that strikes me as what's going on here. Whether the author or editor recognized that making a name happens in two successive chapters. So as chapter 12 is a kind of rebuke of chapter 11. The point, I think, is clear that Abraham, let's think of it this way. Who is Abraham structurally? Abraham is, you won't be surprised when I say this, Abraham is Abraham. A person with actions, characteristics, and so on. But Abraham can also be seen and should be seen as something more. The progenitor of the people that he generates. Abraham is the first Jew. We've talked about this many times before. First has at least two possibilities. Chronological first and logical first. Logical first means, when you think about a logical system, arithmetic, you start with axioms, principles. What comes first in the generating arithmetic? What comes first in doing that are the axioms. The axioms aren't necessarily first in time, but they're first in significance. Abraham is first in both ways. He's the first in time, but he is also the model of what we might call Abrahamic religion. So so the plausibility of that claim rests on whether or not we can find enough meaning in the Abraham story that it serves as a kind of axiom set for the people that follow Abraham. If you start by not believing that 2 plus 2 is 4, or that 2 is 4 minus 2, if you deny that, you can't have any arithmetic. So In this sense, don't you think the Torah is also suggesting in a broader way that this idea of being called and being called by the God of the universe who has a mandate for us, and that the meaning of our lives, the name that we might get for ourselves, is dependent upon that relationship? That, it seems to me, the Torah wants to say, isn't just about Abraham, but about all of Abraham's descendants. So, let's go on. And you shall be a blessing, right? I mean, notice that verse 2 begins all about Abraham. I'll make you a great nation. I'll bless you. I'll make your name great. If it stopped there, Abraham and Abraham's descendants, us, could say, aren't we great? Verse 2 is all about us. But the author had the genius, I might say, of finishing that verse was, and you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and all the families of the earth shall bless themselves by you. That last by you makes the you, Abraham, an instrument, and not just the very essence of blessing on his own. Don't you think that God is here, the author, God is elevating the role of Abraham in its own terms, but also Abraham is to be seen as something more. In addition, the seeing as thing, I think, does not ever ignore the original perception. It's not that I first see something as A, then I see it as B, and therefore it's not A anymore. That's not the point. I see it as A, and I also see it as B, and now it's both. When Abraham saw the three visitors and he gave them hospitality, and the Torah suggests strongly that God is to be seen in the visitors, the visitors can also be seen as a representation of God, but they don't lose their status as visitors. They're not just a vehicle, they're also what they are. So here, Abraham and Abraham's descendants are blessed, but they're also seen as a vehicle for further blessing beyond themselves, without ceasing to be blessed themselves. So let's go on a little bit. Verse 4. Avram went forth as the Lord had commanded. And Lot, so immediately Abraham responds. Avram was 70, and Lot went with him. Avram took his wife Sarai and his brother's son Lot and all the wealth they had amassed and the persons that they had acquired in Haran. So what do we learn from this about Abraham? I'm sorry?
That he was wealthy.
That he was wealthy?
And where would he have gotten that wealth? We have no information about
We really don't. We really don't. What else do we know?
that he took the family.
That he took the family, and the family is the prototype of the community. What Abraham takes with him is the nascent NASC community. He doesn't just act on his own. Soren Kierkegaard has this notion of the single one. Kierkegaard asked the question about the binding of Isaac chapter, why didn't Abraham tell Sarah what he was doing? And Kierkegaard's answer is not that he was afraid or she was still sleeping when he left. Kierkegaard's answer is he couldn't tell her because morality, moral dictates, can be described in language that we can all understand. When God calls you, this is a private communication between you and God that can't be expressed to another. Let me give you an example. Abraham, as he's getting ready to take Isaac up the mountain, goes to the other side of the bed, and he shakes Sarah, and he tells Sarah, here's what I'm going to do. And she says to him, are you mad? I'm calling the police, and we're going to hold you. She doesn't get the power of the communication between God and Abraham. We may reject this notion, but for Kierkegaard, faith is about the individual, in the individual's connection with God. Let's call it, with a small p, Protestantism. The Protestant religions are religions of the individual. That each individual has the capacity to understand Scripture because of a power given to him. Catholic religions, of which Judaism is one, feature community. Abraham already is not acting just as an individual, but as a member of or the leader of a community. And that is already because to whom does God give the Ten Commandments? Not just to Moses. Moses gets them to take them down to the people. Who is it that says Na'aseh v'nishma? We go for this. Not just Moses, that's the nun at the beginning, which is we, Na'aseh v'nishma. It's the community that gets the revelation and that says yes to it. And Abraham already models that idea. We do have communities in the first 11 chapters. We have the contemporaries of Noah, who got it all wrong. We have the Babylonites, who want to storm the heavens. So we don't yet have a community that is dedicated, as Abraham's community already is, to this particular relationship and this particular journey. Don't you think that's a difference as well, Stuart?
I'd like to go back to chapter 12, verse 1.
Yes.
Go from your native land and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. And yet, in chapter 11, they set out for the land of Canaan.
Yeah.
And they came as far as Haran, they settled there.
They already knew the land.
Yeah.
Is that your point?
Why did God have to show it to them?
Well, that's a good point. I don't know how to resolve that. No, I really don't. It's if Terach communicated to the others that he was going with where the destination is, then Abraham already knew. I guess one way of seeing it is, what is Canaan? Canaan can be just like Ur, a city with all kinds of things going on, economic, geographical, political, so on. Or Ur can be understood in terms of its meaning. What does Ur stand for? What are the basic documents of Ur? What are its values? So it may be that though Abraham knows he's going to Canaan, he doesn't yet know that he's going to Canaan as the land of promise. How about that?
I don't mind.
Very good, very good. Okay.
By the way, Abram did not go with his whole family. He went with his wife Sarah.
Yes,
Sarah.
yes.
And his brother and his nephew Lot.
Well, it does say, doesn't it, and the persons here in the middle of verse 5, they had acquired in Haran. What acquired?
His slaves.
I'm sorry?
His slaves, his servants.
Could be. Once again, I'm kind of working with the notion of seeing as. A city can be seen in terms of its traffic, How many traffic lights? Are they good traffic lights? Look at the cars and so on and so on. You have somebody sitting and making notes of the traffic, to see whether or not the lights are well balanced or we need a turn lane and so on. This is all description. But an observer can also ask, what are the values behind the city? What's the city charter and so on? That's a different understanding of the city. So what I'm arguing for is that the transition from chapter 11 to chapter 12 is huge. Something big is happening here. I think the premise of your point is, it's not as huge as I think. Canaan is Canaan. And the fact that I see that the chasm is huge is nothing more than the fact that I see it as huge. And maybe we'll come to see that it is huge. There's transformation. But it may, I guess, is this a supernatural moment, or is this an extension of a natural moment? A journey that's natural becomes a journey that's animated by the supernatural. I say yes. Stewart wonders whether I'm overstating that. Good question. Yeah, we all have to think about that. Yeah. Just as we ask about Anna Karenina, why the heck did she do this? And the answer is, yeah, maybe this, maybe this, maybe this. We read more of the story to see which answer is more coherent with other things that happen and so on and so on. Yeah, Michael.
So I think you answered your own question because, when speaking of the land, and then you also spoke of the land of promise. The promised land is not just promised land, it's the land of promise. And in it are people, including strangers. And those strangers may be strangers, but there may be a promise. They may be adding to the wealth of humanity. They may be the source of all kinds of community, larger than your own one nation. And so there is a great deal of promise there.
Right. So you're agreeing with me and not with Stewart that something big has happened here. No, Stewart isn't denying something big is happening, just it's not as big as I think it is. For me, Canaan is one thing in chapter 11 and another thing, and Stewart is merely pointing out the obvious. The same word is used. And therefore, how do I know? And I like that critique because it forces somebody like me who likes to exaggerate in order to discover. There's this lovely quote by Paul Ricoeur, Paul Ricoeur, the French philosopher, who says, we create in order to discover. So you fabricate, you create an interpretation to see whether or not, in possibly overdoing it, there isn't discovery. And then, of course, we have to back away if it seems excessive. And that's what I think Stewart basically agrees, that something big is happening here. But it may not be as big as I like to think it is, because I like to go for the gold and see if I have to be satisfied with the silver. And you're saying maybe I do. Cindy.
Isn't that what metaphor is all about? I mean, in the road not taken, it's a physical road.
Yeah.
But in the poet's mind, or certainly in the reader's mind, it's far more than a physical place.
Yeah.
It becomes a journey of the soul, or what have you, or of a person, as opposed to, that's all metaphor. That's what poetry is about, what good literature is about.
But notice, Cindy, you're presupposing here that Canaan in chapter 12 is a metaphor, and not just what it is in chapter 11, non-metaphorical. So in a certain sense, I hate to say this to you, but you're begging the question. You're already assuming that Canaan in chapter 12 is a metaphor and stands for something more, and I think Stewart's response might be, it's the same word. What gives you the right to say one is metaphorical and one isn't?
It's the land of Canaan.
The land of Canaan is the same. So I think each of us needs to decide. I like that. The notion of metaphor is also a species of seeing as. You see the road not taken as something else, while also something we're walking on. He's walking on it. Yeah. Doris?
I'm on the side of huge. I think something huge happened. And that is that it's the first time we get a command with a huge promise attached to it. An extraordinary promise. And for me, so Eve is told to do something, chapter 2:15. Don't eat the fruit of this tree. There's no deal, there's no promise. If you don't eat it, you will X, Y, or Z. Now we get a promise attached. No wonder he said yes. What we want to know, what I want to know is, if you didn't get a promise, would you still obey?
Would I still what?
Obey.
If he didn't get a promise, what'd you just say?
Would he still obey?
Oh,
It's one thing if somebody tells me to do something, lose weight, it's good for your health. Well, okay. Somebody says, for every pound you lose, I will bless your name, I will give you this, I will give you that. Well, it's a great motivation. But will you do something without a promise?
I think we'll see in chapter 15 that even when he's given another promise, he rebels. So
Well,
that's a different question. That's a different.
I don't know that he rebels, but he said, where's the promise that you act?
Right, exactly. And God has to give him evidence, show him.
Yeah, but that's fair.
Right, but it's only that Abraham, maybe this is beside the point, can stand up for himself even to God, even with the promise, he can. But let's go back to your question. Would he have done it without the promise?
That isn't my question, actually. I didn't have a question, it's just an observation.
Would he have, I thought you said.
That he did it and he had something of a deal going on. You do this and I will give you this. in
Yeah.
return.
Yeah.
So that, that's good motivation.
Good. And also that is a kind of preliminary form of covenant. I'm doing something for you, you'll do something for me. There's no if-then. If I do for you, will you do for me? It's kind of mutual. I'm going to do for you. And Abraham very quickly responds. Good. Let's go on a little bit. So, verse 5, he takes his family and others, and they set out for the land of Canaan. When Avram, verse 6, when they arrived in the land, end of 5, when they arrived in the land of Canaan, Avram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem, modern-day Nablus, at the terebinth of Moreh. I think a terebinth is a kind of a set of oak trees, a grove, a little bit of a grove. The Canaanites were then in the land. The Lord appeared to Avram and said, I will assign this land to you and your offspring. So here's the promise of land. And he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Once again, action and reaction. God says, I'm going to give you this land. Abraham worships. It doesn't tell us what his motivation is. We could say gratitude. Maybe this is a way of accepting. But once again, a kind of action by God leads to an action by Abraham. With Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, he built an altar to the Lord and invoked the Lord by name. We've seen that before at the end of chapter 4 in the universal history. Then human beings began to call on the name of God. It doesn't tell us exactly why in chapter 4. Here, invoking God's name seems to be a kind of response to something with which God has endowed him. Then Avram journeyed by stages toward the Negev. Gosh, the story. Let me try not to exaggerate here. The story has gotten off to an amazing start. God calls him, makes a bunch of promises. Abraham says yes, and he goes. Then we have a description of Abraham transporting his family. God comes out of the clouds again and promises him the land. Abraham responds with an altar and with a worship and calls upon God by name. That's a complete story. Let's turn to the next page, in my book, the next page. Verse 10. There was a famine in the land. That is surprising, isn't it? After such a glorious beginning, the author dares to point out a serious problem, an impediment, danger. And the danger comes from, let me put it this way, the world that God created. The world that God created nurtures us and deprives us. Our partner, nature, which gives us food and warmth and all of these things, also engages in deprivation. One of the realities of life, even at its highest moments, is there is some problem with the environment in which we live. Okay? So the author dares at this moment to point out also an enduring feature of our lives, the privations of nature. And Avram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. Not only does he get to the land, which God has promised him, not as soon as he gets there, he has to leave. Here's the issue of exile again, which we've noticed exists already in the first 11 chapters. Cain is exiled, Adam and Eve are exiled, the Babylonites are exiled. It's one of the pervasive themes of the universal history. Exile's on the mind of the author, which gives some credence to the idea that these stories were either created or included in Scripture during an exile, when exile is an enduring reality. Let me go on just a little bit. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that I remain alive thanks to you. I want to make two comments about this. One, Abraham does not acquit himself well here. He makes his wife say something that will preserve his well-being, but endanger hers. That's point one. I don't want point two to obscure point one. Point two is, God has called Abraham, go to the land that I will show you. Abraham says, yes, I promise the land. Abraham says, yes. Abraham is one of these guys that when confronted by God, says yes. Here, Abraham acts creatively on his own. There is danger. Abraham acknowledges, sees the danger, and takes an action. He leaves the land that he has promised. And not only that, he recognizes that first move of his creates another danger. Now, not the danger of the natural world, but the danger of other people. What are the impediments that stand in the way of a flourishing life? Even a life surrounded by progress, by promise. And already we've seen what I might call two privations, the privations of nature and the privations of other peoples with whom we interact, have to live, but not always can. So I think Abraham needs also to be praised, or at least it's acknowledged, that Abraham is his own person as well as God's person. Abraham is not just the recipient of a covenant as going along. He's acting. Now, one can deal with this passage in a variety of ways. For example, there's a famous discovery by E.A. Spicer, who was a biblical scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, who discovered, I think they are the Nutsi documents in what is now the present-day Syria, where there is actually a custom in that community of the wife-sister, that you can ask, that you can elevate, you can adopt your wife as your sister, which elevates her status. It's a good thing in that culture. And Spicer says that the biblical author knows this custom, but uses it in a different way, and in a way that we might find exploitative. But in any event, it's an interesting idea here that the biblical author knows something about the culture of surrounding nations and uses it to his or her or their advantage. Let's talk about this just a little bit. What do you think? Bennett?
If Abraham was killed, then Sarah is left on her own and has no protector at all. If he's still alive and she's his sister, he's there to help make decisions about what happens to her and can, to some extent, protect her. So it doesn't, in the sense that it's jeopardizing her more, I don't think so. I think that he's still on the scene and has a say in it.
Good. So the question now is, on balance, is Abraham commendable in this situation or not? And lots of readers, maybe lots of us, think that he's not commendable. You're offering one idea of his being commendable, that his remaining alive is a necessary condition for her remaining alive or safe.
Or not getting into a bad marriage or whatever, or
Right.
becoming a slave for them.
Right. Other thoughts, Jackie?
Yeah, but he's using his wife as a tool to save himself and others. And, if God thinks he is somebody special, you just don't do that. You don't know if she's going to be abused, if she will be killed.
So Abraham uses his wife as an instrument, instrumentalizes her, which is not a good thing. Michael.
My question.
Wait, hold on, just two Michaels.
Sorry.
Michael, yeah, here, and then getting, yeah.
Does Abraham smart enough to test the God, because they have to testing each other. And according to my late mother, and I asked her a question when I was little, how is it God made us choose? She said, God was wandering in the night, and Abraham puts the light in front of his door. God knocked on the door, and Abraham told him, come in. Therefore, Abraham is tested. Does God really going to protect him and help him? He said, you will be my sister. They're not going to kill me. And if God is going to protect her, he will protect me.
You're saying that Abraham is tested here, or God is tested?
Abraham testing God.
Abraham's testing God. In a situation of crisis, will
Yes.
God come to his aid? That's a good point. One can read the Binding of Isaac story in this way too, that Abraham is seeing whether God will go through with it.
Since you brought this, I would like to bring to your attention. We are so much time spent on God's ability to choose the hero, forgetting that at the end of each period, he dumped this here.
He what? He dumps?
Dumped. Abraham, after the story of Isaac, disappeared. No more mention.
God disappears. Either that or God recognizes that there comes a time when a person is on his own.
Do we know what is his mind and heart talking? No.
Okay.
The psychiatrist can hear what is your mind and heart whispering to each other.
Yep. Okay, so Michael's point is...
Same thing with Moses. At the end of the Deuteronomy, Moses disappeared.
Yes. Okay, so...
And Saul was chosen.
Yes.
And Saul disappeared, was killed.
Okay.
Therefore, people, be careful. Don't trust your eyes and your ears. Don't trust your first impression. Be careful. Look in the history. Don't repeat the same mistake.
I like that general point. I'm not sure your examples. I mean, Moses, as Kafka points out in one of his notes, Moses dies not because he sinned, but because he's a human being.
I'm simplifying.
I know. Well, no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think one of the points that you're making here, which I really do like, is that there's an ongoing, sometimes tense relationship between God and human beings, where human beings have to wonder, who is this God I'm dealing with? And human beings, God has to ask the same question. So like any relationship, there are ups and downs to it. And you're pointing out some of the problems. And it's a real relationship, I think, as the Torah wants to suggest. Michael?
My question also has to do with Michael's question. It's essentially a question of motive. You described the building of the altars when they arrived in Canaan as perhaps a thanking of God. But an alternative interpretation might be, here's this land, a land of promise. It's more than just land. But I'm going to build altars all around the outskirts of this land, almost the opposite of taking up stakes, of putting down stakes, taking on a stake to this land. This is my way of showing this is my land, or this is our land. This is our land that's blessed by God, perhaps. Blessed by which God? Our own God or the God of all humans? So it seems to me this question here as to the meaning of when we take a stake to land and say, well, this is our land. This is land that no one else can tax. It's land where we can worship, but it's still a way of staking out a claim to one's land.
Yeah.
It's not.
So what you're saying is that to possess a land requires human agency. The promise isn't enough. We have to act. I like that. You know, think of the so-called wandering in the wilderness during the book of Numbers and so on. I mean, God has promised the land, but the people still have to act, and they often act badly. And when they do, God takes an 11-day trip and makes it 40 years. And human beings are also a problem to God.
Yes, and this land, since I made reference to the property tax exemption, this land that we have, it's a land which is for public worship. Not just our worship, public worship, and it's a land which it's a right, it's an institution which throughout many cultures has said, stay, king, stay away, this is our land where we worship. That's a pretty significant...
Where is that said, by the way, stay away from our land?
Well, in other words, it's land even under Pharaoh, there were lands that could be taxed because they were used for religious purposes. So that's a very world historical state. Our altar is sacred. You can't tax it. Keep your swords out of it. It's land. It's land for worship.
Okay. Yeah. So here on my notes, I have number 1, chapter 12, verse 1 through 7. Number 9, chapter 18. Well, we've done number 1. No. Okay. So inevitably, we didn't get as far as I had hoped. No, we did get to 2, chapter 12, verse 8 and following. So this is why every year, or in some years, we come back to these things, because we can't get it all. Sandy?
Do we have Torah study next week?
That's a good point. No Torah study next week, but yes, Thanksgiving weekend. 2 weeks from today, yes. A week from today, no. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, what a robust discussion we had today. What's that? I'm out of town. Yep. Okay, so Joan, hold on just a sec, Joan. Guys?
On Saturday, I think it's the 3rd.
Yes?
Discussions made for, are we going to have Torah study?
No. So, okay, Joan's asking, good, but we no Torah study next week, then Torah study 2 weeks from today, which would be the 26th, and then on the 3rd, which is the celebration of the 75th anniversary of Abba Hillel Silver's speech at the United Nations, they've asked me, can we give up Torah study? And of course the answer was yes. They're going to have a panel discussion and so on. So no next week, yes the week after, no the week after that. All to be reviewed. All right. Shabbat Shalom. Oh boy. I like your comment.
Thank you. Last week you asked why all of the begets.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that I had the feeling that this whole story is a continuation, and he's trying to show a continuation of the family. This isn't just another random person.
I like that.
And we started, I had 2 series on this, and he started with Noah, and he goes through, that Abraham is really a descendant of Noah. He goes through from Shem, etc. So you're getting this family, and then Abraham doesn't come right away. He's not a direct, he's a direct descendant, but he's not an immediate descendant. 205 years. I mean, that's a long time. So that community, that family has changed a lot. It's grown, it's gone through different marriages.
But it's continuing.
But it's continuing, and hopefully Abraham is growing up more as a mensch, so to speak, that family is having certain traditions, that you live a certain way, you're more moral, you're ethical, or whatever, and okay, it's time for him to. God then comes back again. By the way, God does talk to Noah. You were talking about previous. God
build the ark.
Yeah, but he not only tells him how to. Noah is a person that has God that much knowledge. He not even tells him to build an ark, but he says, "This is how you should build it. I don't want this ark to sink."
Very good. Very good.
Where Abraham says, "Start walking, buddy." And I'll show you the way. If you get off the wrong path, I'll say, no, you take the right fork, not the left fork. When he comes to a fork in the road, and whatever.
So Abraham has more agency than Noah.
But I think also having all those families there, that it's telling you that you have a responsibility for the community. This is your community. It's not just a list of people.
I like it. Good thoughts.
Yeah. Whatever.
No, those are good thoughts. It's a very rich.
I also found it interesting last week. I never realized that you're way back at Cain and Abel, you're picking out the youngest, and then later on, it's always throughout the Torah, it's always the youngest becomes the leader, becomes the one that has the.
It's an argument against the power of primogeniture.
Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting at that point that they
already,
because you don't see that anywhere else.
It's a very good point. I mean, I think once again, it's a polemic against the power of nature. Nature's priorities are not necessarily ours.
I never thought of Cain and Abel as,
Already.
yeah,
No,
right at the
that-
very beginning.
Moses and Aaron, David is the youngest son, and on and on. Yeah, no, the argument, the Torah is a big polemic against the laws of nature, so to speak. The oldest.
Have a good trip.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
First, I don't know that you have an answer, or this is probably a longer question, but the notion of land as a gift, or part of the covenant, as opposed to it being a test or a curse. We don't, through history, don't manage possession of land very well as a species.
We fight over it.
Always, all the time. And are we better off with it or without it?
Well, but it is clear that a community cannot exist without a land. It can be a spiritual community. I have some connection to Jews in Poland because of Torah and so on, but we can't exist as a living, real, actual community unless we live together. You
When you say a community, I would say Jews have lived as a community for centuries without a language.
but very fragile.
But maybe that's part of what keeps us together. Other than,
Would you think that, I mean, are you suggesting, or would you think that land is so much a problem that it's better to have communities without land?
I think that it's an additional, it's a higher test of our bond that we remain connected even in the absence of land.
It's much more amorphous. I mean, let's suppose there's a community characterized by lovers of the Iliad, Shakespeare. And this is a worldwide community. Yeah, there's power there, but there's also lots of problems. And this community only flourishes in the way of the abstract. You run into somebody on the plane who loves someone too. Oh my God, we're bondsmen. But the person who loves, and so on and so on. I mean, land is a concrete entity of togetherness.
So, as you were talking, so are there any other religions or great religions or land is an essential part?
I think Islam. Islam divides the world into Islamic land and land that is not yet Islamic. It's prospective. So the Islamic lands, I mean, what did Muhammad and his descendants do? They conquered within 100 years. I mean, within 100 years, they owned Spain. I mean, at least the lower half.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know about other.
It's a fool's errand.
It's a fool's errand, land.
Yeah.
So many important things are. I mean, one could say, all of our commitments are full. We're going to lose all of it. I mean, that's another way of saying it. I guess the question is, in relative terms, is land a necessary condition for community, and is community a good thing? By the way, throughout 2,000 years, the land of Israel existed in the Jewish mind as aspiration, as memory and aspiration, but not as reality. That idea held us together. It took a huge mythology to get that idea alive, right? That God called us, He gave us the land of Israel, but we blew it, He punished us, we're in exile. It's exile, not diaspora. It's aberrational. By definition, that means we look forward to a time when the aberration is going to be resolved. Let's go to Israel. No, God is going to tell us when. So the whole mythology of we're getting back there one day, even that hope, not including the reality, kept the Jews together. That's a good idea. That's a good example of your point.
Is it a part of a messianic age?
Absolutely. But notice the mythology that was required to get that devotion. A whole theology of history, and a problematic one. We are suffering in 11th century Bologna because our ancestors sinned to such a degree that it's not yet time that we have paid the price of it. So suffering, I'm sorry, but this is part of the world historical process. And we bought it. A lot of us did.
So in respect to, I mean, just ask another completely unrelated question, but just give me a minute.
I don't do minute answers.
Jonathan Cohen on, I think there, Rosh Hashanah, made reference, considerable reference to Rabbi Greece. And Rabbi Greece's writings, I would have to look at some of it. And I'm struck, because I don't know history this well, but I'm struck with how much contemporary respect and attention is paid to Silver, but not to Greece. And it seems, again, from what I gather superficial, that Greece had a very important to the history of Judaism in this country and to the history of this congregation.
Yeah, it's the phenomenon known as the eclipse. Because I know that Rabbi Cohen thinks that not that this is necessarily Rabbi Silver's temple, but Rabbi Greece's temple. And he was a major player. I mean, he was the first president of the Temple Women's Association. He formed a religious school open to the community without membership. I think he was a player in the roots of classical Reform Judaism. So it's really true. I mean, he was here from like 1893 to 1917, a long time. So it's true. You know, we have the Greece Chapel. It used to be the Greece Chapel. So he was certainly honored in his time. But, you know, Roger Connor had the lifetime record for home runs before Babe Ruth. That's it. There you go.
QAD.
Take care. You too. Shabbat shalom.
Here's our game. Here's you'll see it's based on my mom-in-law's in the Mishnah Torah. When he talks about lost and found property.
Okay. So what do you propose here?
Well, look at it.
Okay.
I mean, it's yours.
Oh, thank you so much. How great is that? Yeah. And then how many people can play it?
I don't know.
Oh, you don't know?
I mean, more than one, obviously.
Exactly. Although my brother, when he was a kid, played Monopoly, there were two representatives at the board.
Okay.
Himself and his neighbor, Jimmy Klein.
Okay.
So when my brother needed a hotel,
Right.
Jimmy, would you sell it to me?
Sure. I'll give it to you. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So,
We'll see.
Yeah. So, I guess, I'm not a big Abraham fan. I mean, I think what I give him is constancy. I also see him as, the first waffle theory. When you make waffles and you heat up the griddle, the first one you pour doesn't usually turn out very well because of various things. It wasn't hot enough. And so I see him as the first waffle. And what struck me today is you made a big point, and I think a good one, of mentioning the first promise at the end talks about the instrumentality of so the question is, you think Abraham even heard that part of the promise?
Well,
I don't think so.
in chapter 14, he goes to Lot's aid, works with kings in a war.
Right.
Then the Melchizedek is going to give him his spoils.
Right.
And he says no. So there's an example. In chapter 13.
Well, but I mean, to me, he seems, and rightfully, I mean, he's a person, you know. I think he hears more of the great nation and going to this land that I will give you. And I suppose you could say, well, I mean, the world isn't going to bless you through me, through them, if I don't have a family and become a great, I mean, sort of a great nation. But to me, he, you know, it's like that part at the end. It's like on page 3 of the contract in the small print, and when you sign here, huh? Yeah, sign here. And, oh, I didn't even see that. The other thing is, and you know, the pimping Sarah thing. You made a big point today that in the first 11 chapters of the Bible, when people are left to their own devices, they tend to screw up. And here, Abraham is left to his own devices. I mean, it's only by God intervening, not in... I see it as a different, like, oh my God, what was he thinking? Not, Sarah, we're going here, it's going to be dangerous, but God will protect us.
That's what Nachman was saying.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, what he did is he acted just like everybody in chapter 1 through 11 came up with a scheme, which would have gone horribly. I mean, I don't know, whoever mentioned that by letting Sarah go, I mean, she ended up with the king. I don't think some little Jewish guy who happened to be her brother is going to tell the king how to treat her. I don't think that, I mean, that's not going to happen. So I don't think that is possible. But I'm just saying, here, maybe it was a test by God to see if he, given that I moved him along this far, what happens? Let me put him in a situation and see, does he depend on himself? Does he ask me for help? Does he depend on my grace, benevolence to get him out of the situation? Or does he just do what everybody else has done and figure it out to his wife's detriment and to his benefit?
So you think Abraham, if this is a test of Abraham,
he failed, yeah. But that God didn't give up on him, obviously, because he rectified. And I know the Bible tries to clean that up by saying that Sarah's, you know, they're half siblings.
But that is the reference to the Nutsi documents where that is legitimate.
Right.
Cannot be taken for granted in the text that we have.
Okay, but that's not. Even so, to say, I mean, let's say, to say you're my sister.
An elevator status.
But he also is putting her in great danger. I mean, he's not saying, you know, I think so much of you that I'm going to adopt you as my sister. That would be one thing. That may be the new tradition. To say that you say you're my sister, not because I think so much of you, but because I don't want to get killed, is a different thing.
So even assuming he knows the idea.
Right. I don't think the Nutsis used it in that situation. I think they did it out of kind of benevolence or whatever their lives.
Well, and that's where Spicer makes the point that the author didn't know or forgot the real meaning. I think, as I point out, that not my instinct agrees with you, that if it's not a test, Abraham certainly shows himself to be of too little faith at a very early moment.
Right. Unfortunately, he then ends up a fanatic in the end,
How?
like willing to go kill Isaac.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, long, far down the road, yeah.
Yeah.
So what's your view of the meaning of the first half of the second half of chapter 4? What's it there for? Just to show Abraham's vulnerability as potential for faithlessness. I pointed out the privations of nature and the privations of, and maybe this story shows the problem of human nature, even those who are called. Would that be a reading, you think?
It's not a faith-based gesture on his part.
Although then it's got an interesting fact, doesn't it? That if he's dead, Sarah's certainly gone.
I know, but he's willing to, I mean, many years later, he's willing to sacrifice Isaac, who, if he's dead, the experiment is over. I mean, as over as if Abraham died when he was 32.
So Abraham's not unwilling to sacrifice the future.
Right.
This is one of the reasons why Abraham, you're not a big fan of Abraham.
Right, and he certainly is not the guy to have led the Israelites into the wilderness for 40 years.
Moses is better at it.
Moses, I mean, it's not even, it's like putting the bad boy in, you know, in the bottom of the ninth inning behind by 1 run and the runner at second. I mean, I call it the calloused forehead. You know, Moses was constantly plotzing on the ground. What am I don't think Abraham would have ever done. He would have, I mean, Moses looked to God when he had problems. Abraham would have tried to figure it out on his own, and I don't think he would have done a very good job. He's just a different character. I mean, he's not the right guy for the job.
And your point about the first waffle, I think, has some power. He's not Moses yet. Moses brings Torah, community, and the lineaments of community laws. And Abraham is on his own.
Right.
And therefore, Abraham, a transitional figure. That is just like the 11th or the chapter showed the need for Abraham, let's say.
Yeah.
That Abraham shows the need for Moses. Would you buy that a little bit?
Yeah.
And that accommodates your view that Abraham is the first waffle.
Yeah. I mean,
Never table
I don't think God is totally convinced. He gave him 1 kid. I mean, you're going to build a great nation on 1 kid, you know, and then the next generation, I'll give you 2. And then, I guess, God figured, okay, have at it. And you got 12, you know, I mean, 1, 2, 12. And so I think that God decided somewhere along the line that this might work with this family.
With the multiplication of children.
Right, I mean, you're not going to get stars in the sky and sands on the beach one at a time.
True. On the other hand, the purpose of the Abraham story is also to set up precedents.
Right.
This one, after he's not rewarded, he refuses to reward Melchizedek. The business of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham does, in many of them, acquit himself well. And he's acquitted himself well in the first half of 12, not in the second half, and not, according to you, in 22, chapter 22. So Abraham is an equivocal figure.
I mean, maybe that makes it more like you and me.
There is something to that. I mean, if Abraham originally had 12 children, doesn't he have more children with Keturah, his second wife? He does get some of that. Not here. Here, every person is
crucial. And he was, I mean, I have to say that he was, I've lost her name, the concubine that he had. Yeah, I mean, he was much more kind to her than Sarah was. I mean, she basically wanted to kill her. So, yeah,